our guest is a young Arab American. He's a great businessman, I guess, and he's going to tell us about what he does, which is very unique in today's environment. And I'm so happy to have with us Joe Salama. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Vic. It's a pleasure to be here.
Joe, you are an Arab American. You were born in Iraq, in Egypt, and
I was actually born in Wisconsin.
oh, Wisconsin. So you were born in the U.S.
I was born in the U.S. and I grew up in San Rafael.
Oh, wow.
I lived for 4 years in Egypt growing up.
That's where you get your Egyptian accent from.
Yes. It's 4th, 5th, and 6th grade.
Okay. And you
And,
learned fluent Arabic in Egypt, right?
Yes. I learned Arabic and I met my family, learned about the culture and the religion, and it was a great time.
Okay. Now you went to school and you became an attorney, right?
Yeah.
So you went to Berkeley?
I went to UC Berkeley for undergraduate.
Okay.
I got 2 undergraduate degrees.
Okay.
And then I went to Boston University for law school, where I concentrated in dispute resolution.
Okay, then you came back to Berkeley?
I went back to Berkeley again to get a mediation certification.
All right. Now, we're really proud to have Arab Americans who kind of like stand on their feet and say, okay, we're going to do it on our own, and we have our own business, and they do great. So tell us, you're an attorney, you've been doing your work for a long time. How did you get started doing, and what do you do?
Okay.
And we'll talk about what you do later, but how did you get started doing the business?
Okay, when I first started law school in 1993, in law school, the process is you read cases of people who couldn't resolve their dispute and they went to court. And based on the cases, the landmark cases, you begin to develop and understand a certain area of law. All of the cases, though, there was a breach of contract or there was a personal injury. They all have had something that have gone wrong between the parties. And all of them are people who could not resolve their dispute outside of the court. And it occurred to me, both sides have probably paid their attorneys a lot of money, and they've sat there and they've argued over several years, and the trial itself may have lasted several months long, only to have one of them lose. And it occurred to me that there must be a better way to resolve their problems.
To get a win-win situation.
To get closer to a win-win situation.
Okay. And that is mediation.
That's what mediation is,
Okay.
or mediation is one way to circumvent the legal process,
Okay.
have the people save money, and have a more desirable outcome.
So attorneys hate you then?
You know, a lot of my clients are attorneys.
I see.
When I was only litigating, I participated in a lot of mediations
Okay.
on behalf of one of the sides.
So mediation is a way of trying to get out of court and try to resolve the issues peacefully between the two parties.
Yes, but it also involves parties who have not yet gone to court, and they want to avoid court altogether.
Okay. Okay. Now, and you told me briefly about like what happens, but is there different types of conflicts where mediations can be used?
Yes. Let me just first back up and tell you a little bit about the mediation process itself.
Okay.
Usually it involves one of the parties is frustrated with something and they would contact a mediator and say, listen, I need you to help me bring the other side to the table, and the 3 of us can sit down and we can discuss the matter and see if we can resolve the matter. And as a mediator, my job would be to contact the other party and we sit down and we work something out. There's no judge and there's no jury.
Yeah, but why would the other party trust you? You're coming from the other side.
As a mediator, I have to be impartial. If one of the sides, it's funny, someone asked me one time if I could mediate a dispute involving a family friend of mine. And I said, is that okay with you if I mediate a dispute involving a family friend of mine? And they said, you know what, I don't know anybody else who they will listen to except you. So, that can favor one side or can favor both sides.
Yeah, but who pays?
Both sides pay.
Okay, that's better.
But I would not preside over something unless I thought I could be impartial and fair to both sides.
Okay.
But what you're looking at cost-wise is you're thinking of paying one person for maybe 8 hours instead of paying 2 attorneys for years of litigation.
Yeah.
It's definitely a cost savings.
Yeah. So what are the different types of conflicts where mediation can be used?
Divorce cases.
Well, when people are going to divorce and
they want to work out certain issues.
or the resolution of the divorce.
Yeah, or they want to maybe see if they can stay together.
Okay.
Maybe there's a landlord-tenant dispute where a landlord wants the tenant to pay for last month's rent. And the tenant said to the landlord, well, I made these improvements. I want to deduct that from my rent. So they could be getting into a big argument there. There could be partners who formed a business together and they're no longer able to talk to each other to run the business. It can be an employment case where someone is accused of sexual harassment. And, you know, rather than have the whole thing explode in public trial, who knows what, they can come to me and maybe we could resolve the relationship.
How would you resolve
Either
that?
they stay together or they go apart. It depends on what happened.
If there's a harassment case, I mean, so you're going to just tell them he wasn't harassing, or?
No, we'll see. It's often more complicated than that.
Okay.
So let me, in the landlord-tenant example I gave you, for example, if the tenant says, you know, I want money, I want a deduction for the improvements I made when I was a tenant in the property, and you've talked to them on the phone, and you talk at length with them, and it turns out that every time the landlord sees the tenant, he always brings this issue up. And the tenant, maybe he has a girlfriend, and he doesn't want to be embarrassed in front of his girlfriend every time this comes up. You talk to the landlord, and the landlord says, well, you know what, he has a rabbit in his house. He's not supposed to have a rabbit, but my lease didn't account for rabbits. And the issue for him is about the rabbit, and the issue for the other person is about saving face and getting some respect. So once you get all these issues out, it's called expanding the problem, you have things with which to compromise, and you understand it better. It's a little bit about the money, but if they can accommodate getting the rabbit out of the apartment in 2 months, then you know what, he might say, okay, don't worry about the money.
But how is it better than other alternatives?
Well, it beats trial in arbitration because the parties decide what happens. There's no independent judge or jury who's going to decide what happens to your future. You get if you go to my website, it says the power to craft your own resolution. That's what it is. I don't come up with it. It's the parties that come up with it. And they tell me what they want, and we all work together. It's a collaborative thing. So the advantages over a judge or a jury is they direct their own outcome.
Well, as we're talking, can you give us examples of these things? It doesn't have to be on this one, but you know, just if you can come up with something, past experience or...
Yeah, business partners that can no longer get along because one of them thinks that the other person's sneaking money out and paying for costs that shouldn't be covered by the business. And the other person just isn't getting any response to their emails or something like that. A wall has arisen between the two people who are getting along great, and the business is getting by, but it's far below potential. And when that happens, one of them can up and say, listen, you know, we are far below potential. Either we need to end the relationship somehow, or we need to figure out how to work together.
Okay. And I mean, does that make them like they start losing money and things are not working out, and then they start picking at each other and pointing fingers, and then they...
Yeah, well, let me actually show you a little chart I've prepared.
Okay.
I'd like to take credit for this, but it's not mine at all.
Okay.
I've modified it, actually, and I'm
right.
sure many people have modified it over
What
time.
is it?
It's a progression of sort of the emotional state of how a mediation often progresses.
Okay.
It goes in this direction. And it's more and more emotional and difficult and takes more effort to get to the top here. So you start off with avoidance.
So you don't talk to your partner?
You don't talk to your partner, the husband is ignoring the wife, the tenant isn't responding to the letters the landlord's leaving underneath their door. And then when they finally have to confront one another, there's often denial. Well, you know what, it's his fault for doing this, or it's her fault for doing that. They aren't taking any responsibility for themselves or where they are. And they blame one another, as you've heard me say. But at some point, each party begins to see things from the other person's perspective.
Till now, you're not in the picture, right?
No, I'm in the picture throughout this whole process.
Oh, you are there?
Here's where they call me, because there's a big headache, there's a big avoidance problem.
Okay, so there's an avoidance problem, you get involved, you know, and they decide to work with you.
Yes.
So now you're working with them, and they are in the state of denial.
They're in a state of denial, they're pointing fingers at each other. Oftentimes they haven't sat down at the table yet, and they're doing
What happens
this already.
when you point a finger? There are 4 fingers pointing back at you, right?
Well, that's what they say, and you can't get to the resolution without admitting some responsibility.